And I believe we are live. Hello, everyone. I'm David Chen here on YouTube and Twitch at Dave Chensky. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm here with at Joyo Napping. Joy, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me back to this
Always a pleasure.
exclusive dual YouTube Twitch stream.
Always a pleasure. Why are we here today? Well, we talked about the Oscars here on these channels 8 days ago. It feels like approximately 3 months ago when that happened, but it was about a week ago or so, and we had some more thoughts on the Oscars. So we thought, hey, why not talk about the Oscars again at a time when literally no one else cares or is talking about it anymore? Which is what today is. But in all seriousness, I think Joy had a lot of stuff on her mind that she wanted to share. And in general, I actually literally said this to someone else this week. I said, when I hear about someone who has intelligence and skill that I respect, and they're like, I really have something to say about this, I'm like, I try to follow that trend, and that has led me to where I am today. So I wanted to create this venue, this opportunity, Joy, for you to share some of your thoughts on the Oscars and as we take stock of a historic Oscar ceremony, the 95th Academy Awards that happened in 2023. What are some things that linger for you that you feel haven't been sufficiently expressed?
Well, I did watch a lot of Oscars coverage right after the event. And I think, many of the storylines were similar about certain wins being historic in certain categories, particularly great night for Asian American representation. But I wanted, I'm one of those Asian Americans that is being represented. And I'd like to,
Are you
um,
now?
I am. And I wanted to sit in that in a more specific way because I think I have a few reflections about this movie and what the sort of Oscars speeches and call outs, like how they resonated with me, because I actually think it was a really interesting ceremony in a whole bunch of different ways that weren't maybe like the top headlines, but the next day. But, since we all have limited attention spans, sometimes the next day coverage never shows up. One of the things, though, I did want to just share with you is it still feels like a fever dream that one of the most awarded movies of all time is Everything Everywhere All at Once, a movie that I think would have been lucky to make $20 million at the box office in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And I just cannot believe the sort of fervor of love that this movie has continued to have. So does it feel like surreal to you 8 days later?
Yeah, it kind of does. It's a, they no, I don't think anyone was expecting this movie would win Best Picture or all the awards that it won. I mean, here's evidence. They probably wouldn't have released it in March, April time period if they really felt like, generally they stack the movies towards the end of the year because they want it to be fresh in the Academy members' minds when they vote on these awards. It opened in March, April. It was a weird movie. It had lots of weird elements, atypical things. And so it didn't strike me as like, hey, this is awards bait, you know.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the fact that it ended up taking home all these awards, the fact that it was popular, it's one of A24's top grossing films of all time.
I think it's
Yeah,
the top grossing one. Yeah.
that was surprising and delightful. So yeah.
And I think the way that sits in my body, at least, is that like the movie itself, the topic is about how surreal it feels to be living in this moment and the overwhelm of all the information we're trying to take in all the time while contemplating all these alternate worlds. I literally feel like I'm only in a branch of the multiverse when I think about I watched Daniel Kwan accept multiple Oscars wearing a custom suit from people in Chinatown, inspired by an old Asian woman immigrant's cardigan,
Hmm.
like the kind of stuff my grandmother would wear, and not ironically, but because she was cheap as hell. So I just and practical because it had a lot of pockets would have been like her version of it. So like there's just something about it that it sort of condenses and collapses like so much of my life into this one singularity that I'm like, this can't be happening. Um, and it also feels like, of course, there's always like backlash to best picture winners, and I think there is some to this one as well. But the love that people have for this feels like very deep rooted and genuine. And that is also quite shocking, you know? Like, this is the Academy that gave us Braveheart as a Best Picture winner.
Well, I mean, you're not even mentioning the worst ones, Joy, but yeah. It did strike me that I was reading A.O. Scott's exit interview, and I talked about this a little bit on the Filmcast this week, and how A.O. Scott has been reviewing movies for New York Times for many years. He's retiring from doing that. He's going to go back to the book review. He's been reviewing movies for 23 years. He's reviewed over 2,200 films. And he said in his exit interview that he's not a fan of modern fandom. And he says, not only because I've been swarmed on Twitter by angry devotees of Marvel and DC, and more recently, Top Gun Maverick and Everything Everywhere All at Once, end quote. So there has been people out there saying they don't like the movie, but there's also been in my opinion, toxic contingent of Everything Everywhere All at Once fans kind of harassing those people or giving them a hard time, and that does make me sad. But yes, you're saying you saw a little bit of backlash. I'm saying, like, I think the debate about this movie rages on online is all I'm saying, So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to be kind about what I'm about to say, but like, I think at this point, anything that is popular and maybe not even good can count on a certain, like, that elicits passion, can count on a certain amount of toxic shit, kind of following it wherever it goes. It feels like that just sort of energy is out there when people identify with a thing. And then when the thing gets attacked, they feel that their identity is being attacked.
Yeah,
and that's
totally.
Totally. And I mean, you and I are actually currently watching an excellent Prime Video series called Swarm, which is about what happens when those lines get a little too blurry. And I think that is a moment we're in. Is it worse for EEAAO? I don't know. I think, what I do find striking is it's maybe a slightly different subset of people are having their moment to be toxic fans. So,
everyone gets their moment in the sun.
Yes, so. the queer Chinese daughters of immigrant parents. Well, I did want to talk about a few different things that happened during the ceremony.
Yeah.
And I think you were kind enough.
I have prepared clips that Joy has requested me to play. Now, if everything works well, I will play the clip. Both Joy and the audience will hear the clip, and all is well. Now, I will say, like, it's very possible that these clips will get flagged for copyright reasons and this whole video gets taken down. And if so, sorry about that. But we're gonna let it ride and see what happens. So Joy wanted to draw our attention to a few things that happened during the ceremony.
Yeah, things that I think didn't get as much coverage.
Yeah. So Joy, why don't you take us through some of the things you wanted to mention?
Well, I think starting first in the night would have been Jamie Lee Curtis, or would it be Key? Anyway, what do you have available?
Yeah, I have everything. I have everything available. But yeah, I think Key was first.
Okay.
So let's go, Key. All right, here we go. Now we're broadcasting this live, so people in the chat, it would be great if you told me if this all is working correctly. Okay, here we go. So you should see Key. I'm gonna play the clip now, and hopefully everyone will hear it. And here we go.
My mom is 84 years old, and she's at home watching. Mom, I just want an Oscar. My journey started on a boat. I spent a year in a refugee camp. And somehow, I ended up here on Hollywood's biggest stage. They say stories like this only happen in the movies. I cannot believe it's happening to me. This is the American dream. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the Academy for this honor of a lifetime. Thank you to my mom for the sacrifices she made to get me here. To my little brother, David, who calls me every day just to remind me to take good care of myself. I love you, brother. Thank you to Kendall for all your support and everything you've done. Thank you to A24, to Daniels, Jonathan, Jamie, Michelle, and my Goonies brother for life, Jeff Cohen. I owe everything to the love of my life, my wife Echo, who month after month, year after year for 20 years, told me that one day, my time will come. Dreams are something you have to believe in. I almost gave up on mine. To all of you out there, please keep your dreams alive. Thank you so much for welcoming me back. I love you. Thank you.
Very powerful speech. Huy Quan accepting the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. So, Joy, why did you want to bring this up again today?
You know, there are a few things in it that I think were really notable to me, and I clocked them at the time, but, you know, so much happened that night. He lifted up the fact that he was a refugee, which I did not know. So, you know, he's been in the news a lot and he's been giving interviews. A lot of them have focused on what it was like to be a sort of child actor and then as an Asian teenager and then man being unable to find work. And two things struck me about that. The first is I don't know how commonly known it is in America that there is this generation of Vietnamese immigrants who came here under such really difficult circumstances after the Vietnam War. Many of them coming from, you know, the side that was helping the United States in its, you know, involvement in the war. I'm trying to be like really neutral in the words I'm using. And, you know, the refugee crisis that happened afterwards, you, David, actually raised up in like a TikTok today. But he is actually one of two people that were nominated for an Oscar this year who are boat people from Vietnam. And that's not like a pejorative term. That's sort of like a historical term. The other one is Hong Chow.
Yeah.
And so I found it staggering, like any sort of rags to riches story or, you know, humble origin story in America, you know, we have so many of them, and that's a very common part of the American dream. But specifically to go from being a refugee, and if people aren't familiar, when you're a refugee, it's a sort of certain class of immigration in which you're fleeing a type of hardship and you are petitioning for asylum basically from the difficulty that you are fleeing. And you often, and there are many, there are probably millions of people trying to seek refugee status in the United States right now, sent to a third place where you're waiting to find out if you will go to America or not. And or, you know, wherever else you might be petitioning to try to get in. And in his case, you know, he spent a year in a refugee camp. A refugee camp is a really, you know, very, very tough place to be, as a child, I'm sure. I am now aware, having read a little more, that he and his parents were separated from each other. So I think there were multiple children and some went with one and some went with the other. So you didn't even see your whole family for that time. Comes to Los Angeles, and like that 1 year is actually very short by refugee standards, that there are people who in East Africa could wait honestly like indefinitely, but 10 years, 15 years, that's not uncommon to hear about. And so, you know, it's a very complicated topic, but I just thought it was so striking that we actually had two opportunities to examine like what life is like to come under those circumstances. Hong Chow, her mother was pregnant with her while fleeing and had an extremely difficult labor as a result. And then she ended up in Louisiana, a place where there are a fair number of Vietnamese immigrants. And I just think it is, when I think about this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it's about, when an immigrant parent is trying, like the sacrifices they are making to give their children a better life, I feel like it barely scratches the surface of what those sacrifices really are, for many
Well,
people
and
who
certainly
come to America.
in the case of Huy Quan and Hong Chow, very likely. Now, we should say we don't know what their actual stories were. And as far as I know, Huy Quan has not spoken extensively on the record about his time as a refugee. In his New York Times profile, he was actually asked about it. He was like, the interviewer was like, "Hey, like you were a refugee, and then you ended up being in Indiana Jones. Like, what happened there?" And he kind of like skips over that whole ordeal and just goes straight to the answer about Indiana Jones. And it's like, I do wonder if he is waiting for the right moment. Like if it's either like maybe too painful for him to really talk about, or if he's waiting for like the right moment to really go into it. But I don't think he's like talked extensively about it. What we do know is that it was an international humanitarian crisis that hundreds of thousands of people, Vietnamese boat people, left to try to find a better life and escape economic and political hardship. And literally hundreds of thousands of them died on the way. It was like horrific conditions on those boats leaving, and they encountered starvation and disease, and there were a lot of pirates that were very vicious. And so yeah, it must have been enormously challenging, and to see him talk about it on that stage is very powerful, and does make us think about like what was the journey these people took to get there. The BBC also had an article, I don't know if you saw, Joy, about how Vietnam is not like really doing, not really celebrating Huy Quan's victory. And they posit that it's because it's a really shameful chapter in Vietnam's history. Like they don't want to talk about, oh hey, yeah, he was like one of the boat people that left after this horrifying, set of circumstances. Like they don't want to like talk about it or acknowledge it publicly. So anyway,
As with all land wars in Asia, it's complicated. So yes, I hear what you're saying, and I can understand that. And I am intentionally trying to not like say anything too general. Like I've been to Vietnam and learned a little bit about the conflict, and I took a class on it just about the U.S. and French involvement in Southeast Asia. But like I still don't feel like really comfortable talking too much about it. What I will say is that the thing that came to mind when he took this big moment that he had to highlight that he had come as a refugee and spent that year in that camp. Huy Quan is like a relatively short person, and I just wondered, as I was reading about him, he was in Indiana Jones when I was a kid, and I thought he was like about 6, 7, 8 years old. It turns out he was 12. He doesn't look 12. And then I think by Goonies, maybe he was 13 or 14. And he looked so young and so adorable. But I do wonder if he, because of the circumstances he was in, didn't get as much sort of nutrition, as you would really want for a growing child. And this is just like total conjecture on my part. But like my brother was born in America. My father was born in Taiwan. My brother's like 5 inches taller than my dad because of protein, and like growing up with more food. Honestly, my father was pretty poor. So it made me feel like some of the things we had cherished about him, like his adorableness, like, and his acting ability might have been, that he was actually a little bit of an older kid in a younger kid's body. And that just made me really sad to reflect on.
I want to call out that Peruvian idol in the chat is saying Hong Chow talked about her story on the WTF podcast. Her dad was shot and survived as they were making their escape. So I did want to call out that as a place to access Hong's story. And yeah, I will tell you, here's a funny story. So one thing that I've been, I don't know about funny, but it's more just like a story. One thing that I've been, one thing that is like in my plans is like to show my parents Everything Everywhere All at Once and like record their reaction. Like I want to just see what I think that would make for some good content because I think they'll probably be really confused and they won't like it. Um, and I was telling my dad about this plan, and he was saying how he's like here's the thing. He was like he literally like put his hands to his head, and here's the thing about the movie that I don't think I it took me a while to understand is like Ki Huy Quan. Like when I first saw the trailers or the commercials, I thought Ki Huy Quan was Michelle Yeoh's son. In
Because he's
in
so young.
because he looks so young, and in reality, he is 9 years younger than Michelle Yeoh. Now, Michelle Yeoh looks,
Pretty
amazing.
good.
So, I think they look like of equal age, or they could easily pass for of equal age. But my dad was just like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to accept them as like husband and wife. So I'm like, okay, well, they're
Wait till he gets to CEO Waymond in the Wong Kar-wai portion of the movie.
Yeah, indeed.
Um,
So anyway, some assorted spiraling thoughts on Ki Huy Quan in the wake of that speech that we wanted to share.
I will say, I just want to like highlight that bit. One of the things I appreciate as sort of like a metatextual like thought about everything everywhere is you start by seeing him as almost like he could be mistaken for her son because he's so completely emasculated by her, and she like doesn't even have time to read the divorce papers, right? Much less sign them. And he has this sort of goofy, silly energy. And then as the movie, I mean, I'm going to spoil the movie, but I hope that's okay at this point. As the movie continues, you see, okay, he's actually like his character, or the alpha version of his character, is like fighting people with a fanny pack and like incredibly skilled. And it's a certain version of masculinity, but it's also still pretty like wacky. He's fighting people with a fanny pack. So it's like kind of like the symbol of Asian dad uncoolness is like the fanny pack, I feel like. And then as the movie goes on, you see him in many different other iterations, but especially with this incredibly emotional core of the movie in which she's the movie star and he's like the CEO. And you realize, oh, this man could actually be dapper. He doesn't need to be the 8-year-old I have in my head and just aged up. He could actually have the acting ability, Ki Huy Quan, the actor, and Asian men can be many things. We don't have to be the karate star, or the cute kid or the like sweet, goofy one. And I really hugely appreciated that it was like a testament to the multitudinous of what he can be. And it is literally almost like a tryout reel for like, can't you ever cast an Asian man in a role that looks and feels like this?
Mm-hmm.
Like I really appreciate like from a representation standpoint, even what he is doing within his one, role within this movie.
Well said. All right, Joy.
I mean, he's really hot. He's really hot in that section.
Anything else you wanted to talk about from the Oscars?
What about Jamie Lee Curtis?
I have all the clips.
Do you have the little clip of her speech? Let's talk about her.
I do. All right. So shortly after, I think right after Ki Huy Quan won for Best Supporting Actor.
Oh, and side note, it's so sweet when Ariana DeBose starts crying when she says his name. Like, I've rewatched it and like, that was really...
She breaks up while she's saying Ki Huy Quan.
Yeah.
Okay, here is a little clip. This is a very small portion of Jamie Lee Curtis's speech.
To all of the people who have supported the genre movies that I have made for all these years, the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, we just won an Oscar together.
So Jamie Lee Curtis had a...
My father were both
okay.
nominated
Sorry,
for
I didn't.
Oscar.
Yep, you didn't want me. Okay, there you go. Okay, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say,
just clip in, just step over the clips that I meticulously put together. That's cool. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
I need the Charlie Brown music. I just, out of all the things that she shouted out, that really caught me a little bit off guard. And I wanted to ask you about this. Was until this movie, Jamie Lee Curtis taken not very seriously as a movie star? Was she seen as just a scream queen?
You say this, and there is a pretty I saw a minor Twitter eruption occur recently. W Magazine published an
No,
article.
no, you didn't, because you're not on Twitter.
I'm certainly not making original tweets, but I do still see stuff still graces my sphere of influence. W Magazine published an article called "The Year Horror Went Highbrow," and I'm going to read the first paragraph of this article. This is by Maxine Wally. Quote, "Horror films had a tough few decades. From the 1980s until recently, movies featuring a murderous doll, a ghostly presence, or a creepy neighbor with a taste for revenge had been mostly relegated to the realm of C-list actors, ham-fisted dialogue, and predictable plots. Now the genre is a cultural force to be reckoned with. Thanks to a mix of box office hits with crossover appeal, prestige projects with top-tier directors and major stars, and creatively ambitious indies, horror movies have become essential communal experiences that spark important conversations while delivering a whole lot of fun, end quote. The internet descended upon this article with the rage of 1,000 suns, specifically that opening paragraph, which is like pretty rough as an opening paragraph, because it's basically like horror films were complete garbage until I started paying attention to them recently. And unfortunately, even though I do think the pieces, especially specifically that paragraph is bad, I do think it probably reflects some truth of what people, like some amount of people
What
think about
Academy
horror films.
voters might have thought.
Perhaps. Not me. But perhaps it speaks to some truth that other people whose opinions I don't agree with might believe, right? So,
Well, so I think the question is like, was Jamie Lee Curtis, setting aside whether she should have won versus Angela Bassett or Stephanie Hsu, is it true that she was viewed as sort of like a genre movie second class movie star?
well, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that she was known for were the Halloween films, right? I mean, I know her from True Lies, Freaky Friday.
True Lies is a genre film, right? Kind of.
Yeah, as well as Knives Out. But what are you getting at, Joy? Why are you maybe yes, maybe no? Like, some people maybe don't like horror films, didn't respect the Halloween movies. You know, some people like them, revere them. Like, what are your feelings on it?
It just felt like a big redemption Oscars. And that was one reason that I think the vibe in me reading recaps of it, everyone, regardless of background, seemed to say the vibe of the room was just so positive and so good. My vibe was really positive and good because my favorite movie was winning all the things, but I didn't know how that was going over in the room. And I now realize, it went over great in the room. But I think like with Jamie Lee Curtis specifically, I think she was being, yes, her parents were both very famous, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh, and she mentioned them in the clip that I cut off. Sorry that I spoke over it. But I thought like, there's a chance like that while she's a famous person, she hasn't been like taken all that seriously as a capable actor.
Yeah.
And I wondered about that.
People in the chat are bringing up her other movies, Fish Called Wanda, Trading Places. And I think it's like, yeah, like I love a lot of the movies she's been in, but they're not typically movies that the Oscars honors. Do you know what I mean? Like the movies that she's well known for. So I think that's probably part of it,
Yeah. Well, anyway, I do find the distinction between genre film and not genre film to be like a very odd one. I don't even understand that term. I mean, I know what it means as a term of art, but I think it's an odd term. And in the same way that Guillermo del Toro in his speech said, animation is not it's not a different type of film. It just is a film. That is sort of how I feel about genre films versus not. I mean, I think one of the, for me, truly greatest works of art of the last 10 years is Get Out. I think about it every day in some context or another. And, I guess that's a genre film, quote unquote, but I, find that distinction very strange.
Agreed. Also, L. Damon in the chat is saying that Kevin Kline was nominated for A Fish Called Wanda. So scratch what I just said about movies like A Fish Called Wanda not typically being nominated for Academy Awards. But anyway.
But maybe because Jamie Lee Curtis had the sort of sexy babe role in it. I don't know. Okay, so
By the way, your
I also
connection is like fading, so I think we should try to like, get through the next ones as quickly as possible, basically.
okay, great. Well, I
Yeah.
wanted to chat a little bit about some of the things that Daniel said. So, do you want to go ahead and
Yeah,
play?
which one?
How about director?
Okay, here we go.
Oh my God, thank you, sir. Our fellow nominees, you guys are our heroes. This is weird. We want to dedicate this to the mommies, all the mommies of the world, to our moms. Specifically my mom and dad, Ken and Becky. Thank you for not squashing my creativity when I was making really disturbing horror films or really perverted comedy films or dressing in drag as a kid, which is a threat to nobody. Yeah, thank you to everybody who worked on our movie.
I know every director agrees with me when I say a director is nothing without their incredible cast and crew. This is my family, my friends. If our movie has greatness and genius, it is only because they have greatness and genius flowing through their hearts and souls and minds, and they gave that to us, they gave that precious gift to our film. The world is opening up to the fact that genius does not stem from individuals like us on stage, but rather genius emerges from the collective. We are all products of our context. We are all descendants of something and someone, and I want to acknowledge my context, my immigrant parents, my father who fell in love with movies because he needed to escape the world and thus passed that love of movies on to me, my mother who is a creative soul who wanted to be a dancer, an actor, and singer, but could not afford the luxury of that life path and then gave it to me, my incredible brothers and sisters who helped me survive the chaos of childhood, my friends from high school who taught me sorry, I'm just going to keep going. The RCCC, you taught me the liberating freedom of creativity and joy, and your DNA is in this film as well. My incredible son, Yeoh, you rearrange my DNA every day, and it's awful and beautiful every single time. If you ever watch this, I hope you know that you should never have to live up to this standard. This is not normal. This is kind of crazy. I will love you no matter what. And lastly, I just want to go back to my original point. There is greatness in every single person. It doesn't matter who they are. You have a genius that is waiting to erupt. You just need to find the right people to unlock that. Thank you so much to everyone who has unlocked my genius. This means so much to us. Thank you to the Academy.
That was the Daniels accepting Best Director Academy Awards at the 95th Annual Oscars. Now, people in the chat are slagging me off. They're rightfully correcting. Rihan Khwaja says A Fish Called Wanda actually won director, screenplay, and supporting actor. Wasn't just nominated. So, my bad, folks. I am not intimately familiar with the Academy winnings of A Fish Called Wanda. I was barely verbal when that movie came out. So what else did I want to say about so going back to that speech.
I think there's actually a ton to unpack there.
Totally.
And I was really grateful that the Academy, that clearly went on for a while, but they didn't play them off and they let them have the time to say all of that. And I really, really appreciated it.
Yeah. So what stuck out to you, Joy?
Well, every time, a couple things. First off, throughout the season, I think Daniel Scheinert and Kwan have been very cognizant of who is doing the speaking and I really feel that Daniel Kwan gets far more airtime and Daniel Scheinert just allows questions to be directed to Daniel Kwan. And it's not just for optics, I think, but also because there is a historical pattern of who tends to end up getting the questions or be seen as the more, credible person. And you also get the sense Daniel Kwan doesn't necessarily love the spotlight and speaking publicly, but I think he has worked through that in order to make sure that his voice is also coming through, even when it feels awkward or uncomfortable to him, because it's important from a representation standpoint. So Daniel Scheinert had a much smaller part of that, but I did appreciate that he they both spoke on this theme of like the collective of people around them and the parents who, in his case, supported him. I really appreciated that he shouted out that he had dressed in drag as a kid. He really didn't need to mention that little detail, but given what is happening right now with drag brunches and drag reading hour at the library literally becoming a criminal act in so many states, I really was grateful that he took the platform, to say that in a way that felt very authentic. And then in Daniel Kwan's side, he said something that I have never heard really said before. So what struck me is that we have a very famously individualistic culture in America. And the idea is something along the lines of survival of the fittest. We're all going to compete, and that's going to like force each of us to up our game. And then the best ones will win, and the best ones, whatever that means, like inherently whoever's the best, not the most advantaged, but the best internally, are going to win the things or light the way for others or be an example or something. And he said, like, this is fundamentally not how he thinks about it. It's that it is a collaborative effort to create a context from which your own genius can be expressed, and that literally everyone can be a genius and everyone is a genius. And even in the way we define genius is that it's exceptional, right? Like that's how we grow up defining that term. And it is so much truer to what I believe, the way that he described it. And the other thing is I thought it was actually stealth kind of Asian American, because we have a very collectivist culture. It's more like we subsume our identity for like the larger whole, and that's like a Confucian kind of idea in East Asian cultures. And it's got, its pluses and minuses, and it can be very uncomfortable as a, way to come to America where you're expected to be individualized and have your own identity and compete. And so I just thought it was a really beautiful alternative to just saying, okay, you're like a little individual achievement factory, which is the sort of tiger mom stereotype of like the messages that we get as kids, as Asian Americans. And instead say, there's this other way to be like Asian American and support each other. And it just honestly felt so much truer to the best parts of my own experience. And I thought it was really beautiful. And I thought it said something very different about art than like the individual genius toiling on their own.
Yeah, well
said. Did it resonate with you too?
Yeah, totally. A few things. I first want to say I hate everyone in the chats because Dorgan has explained to me that only Kevin Kline won for A Fish Called Wanda. And I've now spent 3 minutes of this broadcast talking about A Fish Called Wanda, and that's time I and the viewers will never get back. So
but A Fish Called Wanda is really great. So if anything, people should take those minutes. We're going to bank the other 90 minutes, and you can just go watch A Fish Called Wanda.
Yes, fair enough. But earlier guy Rihan was wrong, and you got like this is a live fire. There's no net here. We're literally broadcasting live. You can't be feeding me wrong information in the chat.
No, and that's taking away things you could be listening to that your wife is saying. And always you should be listening to your wife.
It's so true. Okay, so the thing you said, I think it's all well said, Joy. And the thing that is really interesting, if you watch all the making of special features for Everything Everywhere All at Once, is the filmmaking process was like extremely collaborative. Do you know what I mean? Like it was like they hired like the best visual effects person they knew that would work with them, and the best costumer and the best hairstylist. And it's like, I don't think this is how James Cameron makes his movies, right? I think James Cameron shows up, he's like, I have an extremely clear idea of like what I want this to look like. And I'm not saying James Cameron is not also a great collaborator, but I think like from what I could sense, it was like they brought all these amazing people together and were like, hey, we're gonna make this movie together. Like you're the best person to tell me what the hair should look like you should tell me, and so on. And it just feels like it was creating the circumstances under which this, as you said, genius could be activated. In a way that probably isn't the case with many films, I think there is a tendency, especially in online discourse, to attribute movies to the work of a single individual. And it is part of this American individualistic culture. And it's a very intoxicating idea, this idea that like one dude could achieve this all, because then it's like maybe you could be that dude one day.
Yeah, especially
Um,
if you're a woman, you have a shot.
yeah.
No, seriously,
Uh,
I think that it's always a dude. So
yeah.
that gets exalted.
Yeah. And it's like, and it's just kind of, it's because, it's like the great man theory of history, right? Like how like, you know, much of history, often history is told as like a series of deeds by like great men. It's like, but it's all fallacy, it's,
It's
and
totally a fallacy.
especially for movies, it's like an extremely collaborative process. And I like that he took the time to highlight that. Um, I've also obviously spoken online on TikTok and Instagram about like the bit where he says this isn't normal to his child. You don't need to live up to this. And that's also very powerful.
And
Because
oh, go ahead. I didn't mean
no,
to cut you off.
go ahead.
Well, he has also said in on his Instagram, he said afterwards, like here's some images from Oscar night, and a feeling that I was having was that I was already peaking and I didn't know how to hold on to it or what to do with that feeling. It's like too much to process. And so I think like he is saying that to his son, like it's okay if you don't ever achieve this and it's not normal, but he's also saying it to himself. It's okay if I never do this again, because this is really not normal. And I thought that was really sort of beautiful and generous and said with a lot of grace.
Agreed. He put things in perspective in a really powerful way. So yeah.
Karen S. in the chat is pointing this thing out that I was actually thinking about mentioning too. So like one example, like a tactic of how the movie was made in a more collaborative way is that apparently every morning, so they took over that building that was like the IRS building as their filming area, and people would be working in all different parts of this building on, say, the costumes or props or whatever. But every morning they would make literally everyone come from every corner of the building and stand in a circle and do like exercises together to loosen up for like, I think 15 minutes, and a different cast member, or not cast member, but a different person would lead it every day. And then, so first of all, that's very egalitarian, like that sort of taking turns vibe. And then you're all like looking at each other around this circle and thinking, okay, together we are going to make this thing, as opposed to the shape that I think of the most often, which is a hierarchy, you know, and that decisions flow from the top down. And it was also a relatively small group, and I think that helps with the feeling of intimacy. I don't know if they want to be the kind of people who make movies that, you know, have 1,000 VFX artists working on them. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I recently published my the transcript of my interview with them over at decodingeverything.com. Recommend you check that out. And when you go to watch a Marvel film, it's like there's like thousands of people on the VFX, and the circumstances under which VFX are created is very regimented. It's like, hey, there's probably like group account managers and like people you need to talk with to be like, hey, I need another 5 hours of render time on the blah blah blah, and that's just not how they wanted to make the movie. They're like, hey, they want to like literally get into the After Effects file themselves and like, hey, what if I manipulate it like this? Does this work? Does this look better? And that's why they have like 9 people, not 9 dudes, but like 9 people, or is something on the order of 5, 7, 9 people do the visual effects on their movie. And it allows for like a much more collaborative experience than I'm giving you orders, you're passing the orders down like 5 levels, and then someone
with like a checklist, and someone has to go through it and just mark that every single one of these things was done, which is like how it gets very like task oriented, right?
Yeah.
I think so there are many like emotional moments in the speeches that will stick with me, but the most important idea that I heard all night was that idea that genius like really actually comes from the collaborative. And, we think of Darwin, or we think of Copernicus, or, like whoever famous great man of history. There's actually a book that's gone back and like established that every single one of these big inventions, big breakthroughs came from a person who had a circle of thinkers around them, and they were all sort of pushing each other and protecting each other from what feels like horrible risk taking when you are trying anything new. And so I have believed this idea for a while, and it was really beautiful to see it raised up. Another person who said something not totally dissimilar was Paul Rogers, the editor. He didn't say it in the speech on stage, but he said it afterwards. I think you have that clip too.
Yeah, it's not quite the same point as what you just said, but let's hear the clip. Here we go. This is Paul Rogers, who won the Oscars for editing, best editing for Everything Everywhere All at Once. And afterwards, after they win the award, they go into the press room and they answer a bunch of questions from journalists. And this is something he said that Joy wanted me to highlight.
And like, you know, this kind of thing, unfortunately, does happen to guys like me a lot, too much, most of the time. And so I think that what Dan and Daniel are really conscious of is paying attention to who are we mentoring, who are we hiring, what kind of stories are we lending our time and our energy to tell. And that's you know, I don't know if that's if there's one thing that is the magic to this film, but that's part of it. I think it's a combination of good people making good films with other good people and telling good stories. So, yeah.
That was editor Paul Rogers in the after Oscars press room talking about, responding to questions about winning Best Editing Oscar. So, Joy, why did you want to highlight that? That was a clip you asked me to take.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I hear you saying that they're not really the same point, but in my head, they're actually related. And so let me just tell you how it sits in my little individual brain, and you can tell me if this makes any sense. In order for this structure to work, this pyramid structure, there needs to be a certain degree of like command and control. And I think the further down you get, it can become, the saying, the adage is that the shit rolls downhill, right? So basically, you are left interpreting orders that feel like whims. You don't understand. You don't have a sense of ownership of what you're doing. This is in a, not very well functioning and very hierarchical structure that can occur. And if I think of the circle, and the more collaborative version of this, it is really hard for people to do their best work when they are being overworked, when they don't have a personal life, when they don't feel included, and they feel like they have to just scrap for themselves to have basic recognition. And so I think there's a degree to which he's talking about inclusivity. And then I think, I don't know if it was in that clip about, like making this job more sustainable is also part of it. Like, it doesn't need to be an abusive job, basically.
Earlier on in that clip, he talks about how the Daniels really facilitated a good work-life balance on the film. He's like, they allowed us to see our families. Like, we got enough sleep every day. He talks about how it was like a very reasonable work environment.
And so, in film, a lot of times because budgets are tight, especially indie films, the reputation is that people effectively get abused, and you sacrifice your health, and whatever for art, quote unquote. But I think there is a question in there of like, don't we make better art if we're not only more collaborative, but also like more respectful of our own limits as humans, both for me and for you. And so I thought that was a really, I thought his humility as well about his own place, like, oh my gosh, not I have an individual editing achievement, but we have created a thing and I happen to get an award for it, was, continuing to sort of sing the same themes. And he said it from the stage too. He basically said, if all this goes away, we will all still be here as friends. Like, he really felt the truth of that. He says this to the Daniels, like, we'll all still be here for you, just because, even if you never make another movie, basically, just because we're all caring for each other as humans first.
Indeed. All right, Joy. I think there's a couple topics that you want to discuss that don't have clips associated with them, right?
Well, I think there's only one left, which is about Michelle Yeoh winning. So I was so curious, like, what Michelle Yeoh means in your household. So you also are from Taiwan, like my family. And, what Michelle Yeoh winning, she is the first actress who identifies as Asian to win this award, but I also feel like there's something pretty specific it means to me. I don't know. Like, I think you're actually even a bigger Michelle Yeoh fan than I am, though.
Yeah, huge Michelle Yeoh fan, but it sounds like you have something specific to say, so let's start with that.
Um, well, Michelle Yeoh is 60 now, and I am less than 60. But it is fair to say that I have grown up looking up to Michelle Yeoh. So I'm watching Jackie Chan movies and I'm in college. Like, that's when I discovered Hong Kong action cinema. And she's one of many like incredible badasses who I'm like, holy crap, like who is that? And how could I ever do that? And then as you follow her career, you know, I saw her in Crouching Tiger. I saw her as a Bond girl. You know, I've seen her, I think actually for me, her most iconic role, the one that like pierces my heart most, in addition to the Everything Everywhere role, is as the mom in Crazy Rich Asians, because she is so terrifying, and she really channels exactly what is so terrifying about my grandmother's generation. And so I have felt that she was like one of many great Asian actresses, but in my heart, as we continued to watch her evolve, she continued to have a career. She did the Star Trek show. You know, she kind of like hung around Hollywood or seemed to get more roles than other people. And there's like nothing she can't do. There's no genre she can't do. She was a dancer. She can fight. She was incredible in Shang-Chi. She you know, was so icy and incredible as the mom in Crazy Rich Asians. And obviously now she's doing this role where she's literally doing everything, everywhere, all at once. And part of me was like, if Michelle Yeoh can't win an Oscar, then there is no hope for anyone like me, because she is like the best of us at every stage of my life. And she is killing it in every direction. And yes, I was happy she was the first Asian to win, but it felt a lot more like she's the best we have. She's the vanguard, you know, like, so she's going to have to be the one to sort of break up the iceberg, because there's no other alternative. I don't know if that is how it sat with you, though.
Certainly, I wasn't thinking about all that stuff, you know? I mean, I think for me, it felt like a lifetime achievement award, you know? Like, it felt like Michelle Yeoh has this incredible body of work. You already mentioned many of the movies. I mean, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, you know, which was really honored at the Oscars. She was a huge part in it. She was great in it, you know, and obviously just like a bunch of movies that are incredible from the '80s that many people haven't even seen. Many people of my generation haven't even seen, but when you see clips of them go viral on like Twitter and TikTok, and they're incredible, you know. And for me, it's like, hey, here's finally somebody who has deserved this recognition finally receiving it, and overcoming the barriers under which most people over which people like don't usually recognize these kinds of achievements. So yeah, it's fine. It's basically like, hey, here's someone who I've admired for a really long time. Finally, get the admiration. Like everyone else, finally is admiring this person as well. I liked this person before it was cool, and now everyone else likes them, and that's cool. But like I liked them before it was cool. That's the conclusion, I think, is really what we should say. So.
Well, Karen S. in the chat is mentioning that the morning after the Oscars, she actually had penned an op-ed. She clearly had written it ahead of time. And in the New York Times, you know, she published a piece about earthquakes. She had survived being in an earthquake, and the more recent earthquake in Turkey and northern Syria, you know, people are still suffering greatly from. And so I thought it was really fascinating that you almost sense that she had wanted to say something about this issue sooner, but there's a lot of discipline, quote unquote, required in an Oscar campaign to keep everything sort of on message and to keep this like sort of train rolling through the series of work ceremony. So it felt like the moment she had a chance, she was like publishing something to try to use her platform to talk about this other really important topic. And also that when these kinds of disasters strike, women very disproportionately bear the brunt of it. So I encourage people to check that out if they haven't seen it already.
By the way, did you catch that there was a minor Twitter controversy on right before the Oscars with Michelle Yeoh's tweets? Do you see this? Or with Michelle Yeoh's Instagram post?
Was it an Instagram post?
Yeah, Instagram post where
There was just one, right?
yeah,
Yes.
she posted an Instagram post containing screenshots of an article about the Oscars that referred to Cate Blanchett, which may have violated voting rules. And the article was entitled, "It's been over 2 decades since we've had a non-white Best Actress winner. Will that change in 2023?" And the caption was, "This is not just for me. This is for every little girl that looks like me. We want to be seen. We want to be heard." And I think that basically there is a under the references to other nominee section, social media from people associated with an eligible film casting a negative or derogatory light on a competing film or achievement will not be tolerated. In particular, any tactic that singles out the competition by name or title is expressly forbidden, end quote. So theoretically, it could have run afoul of those rules. She deleted the post. Doesn't seem to have impacted the outcome. But
it felt like a very minor.
It was very minor.
kerfuffle.
I mean, hey, we're talking about stuff that happened 8 days ago, so it's like, or 12 days ago, so I'm just like, hey, that was another thing that came up that I was kind of like, huh. In the full accounting, I'm like, huh, interesting.
But just to be clear, like, so in her acceptance speech, she's like, "This is a beacon of hope for little boys and girls who look like me." And I'm like, Michelle Yeoh, I don't look at your Oscar win and think, "Oh, I could do that. That gives me hope." There's no fucking way. Like, it makes me think, you deserve for you to go get an Oscar and you deserve to be cast in roles where you're number one on the call sheet, which is a thing that I think she had maybe never experienced prior to this specific movie. She's always been like number 2 or number 3 or 5 or whatever. But I want it for her. And I do want it for maybe, I guess, the other people who want to be in this business. But in no way does it make me think that I can be like Michelle Yeoh. On my best day, I have like 1% of her intensity.
Indeed. People also brought up that the only 2 women of color to ever win Best Actress were also Bond girls.
Right.
Which is, I guess, a coincidence and also kind of
deeply sad.
Is it a sad commentary? Because Joy is very against the very concept of Bond girl, I think, right?
Help me understand how I could be in favor of the concept of the Bond girl.
Well, I'm not. I don't. I
you
certainly
know about me.
I certainly wouldn't expect you to be in favor, but like neutral, perhaps. You know.
What's the neutral? Like, I don't like to celebrate my oppressor. So no, I'm not into it.
Fair enough. And on that note, Joy, anything else to talk about from the 95th annual Oscars, or shall we stick a fork in it?
I will say one other thing. Daniel Scheinert wore thrift store clothes. And did you know this?
I've learned it from the chat today. Yep.
So like, I think he's from Alabama, and he and his mom had found that suit in a thrift store like some while back. And he's like an odd, tall and skinny. So it was like unusual. It's hard to find a suit at a thrift store, as everybody knows, that'll actually fit you. But I am deeply into not purchasing clothes. This is used, I'm very, David knows I spend an inordinate amount of time and pain sort of on this topic. And I really feel like they embody like a completely different set of values. And it just so happens, more than I think like the Oscars is going to become about this, it's like these people kind of collided with the Oscars. And for a short window of time, we had the multiverse branch that like springs from whatever that is. And probably they'll go their separate ways in the future. But I think, I personally was so thrilled to see that.
Yeah, to go back to the Shiner, topic for just one more moment, I think watching the speech again, it's like it's so clear that Daniel Kwan has prepared very well for the speech, which I always am a fan of. I always appreciate that. Um, I saw some people in the chat saying like, "Oh, it's because Daniel Kwan's such a better speaker than Daniel Scheinert." And I have interviewed them both, and I think Daniel Scheinert is perfectly articulate. Like, I don't think he is a bad speaker at all. I think it actually has been really amazing to see him defer to Daniel Kwan because I think it's the right thing to do in this case. And it just, as I was watching it again, thinking through it again, it's just like it must take a lot of, like, I'm just so curious what the relationship is like, In the best version of it, Daniel Scheinert's like deferring to Daniel Kwan because he like wants to lift up his friend, and elevate.
I think in the best version, it's even less effortful than that.
Right. Yeah. Perhaps. I hope it's not the bad version where he's like, everyone's talking about all the great stuff that Daniel Kwan's doing, and Daniel Scheinert's like, but I was a co-director too. Like, I don't think it's that.
I don't think it's that.
They seem like they have a very like wholesome relationship, but it just strikes me that in general, for someone who is a director in general, which by the way is a difficult thing to be, because basically you need to believe in yourself when you are a director. You need to, like, when everyone is saying, hey, this thing doesn't make sense that you're doing, this thing's not going to make any money, it's not going to be good, you need to believe, like, hey, I am right, like, this is going to be good. It struck me that, like, if you're a director, I think you have to have some sense of egotism. That Daniel Scheinert seems willing to like surrender his ego for the sake of his friend, and I do find that deeply moving. I do find that like really powerful, and it earns a lot of respect from me. And I hope that Daniel Scheinert, like, I honestly hope Daniel Scheinert gets his day in the sun in the way that I feel like Daniel Kwan got his day in the sun because of this movie. Like I think they both were greatly honored, but I feel like for the next one, maybe I'm curious if Daniel Scheinert's going to take the lead on the PR campaign. Either way, I find it just very lovely what the relationship seems to be like from the outside. I don't know what's going on inside, but from the outside, it seems very lovely, very wholesome, and I admire it. So,
counterpoint, they've already both gotten their day in the sun, and this is how they chose to use it. And it's a collaborative. They're literally called the Daniels as a unit,
yeah.
So
I think they're actually just called Daniels. There's no the.
I know everyone says the, and like you have said it and I've said it, and yeah. But counterpoint being like, it's not necessary to speak in order to be heard.
Indeed. All right, Joy. Well, we actually haven't mentioned a lot of the other controversies that have come up around the Oscars.
Controversies.
That don't have to do with Everything Everywhere All at Once. People in the chat have mentioned it, like the dancers they chose for the Natu. There's like some controversy around like lack of South Asian dancers for Natu, and Andrea Riseborough, that whole thing. Although that kind of died down after the initial wave. Certain people being played off in terms of speeches, but not others, and what was behind that thought process. These are all a bunch of things that have happened at the Oscars that we did not discuss today. So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge, like, we didn't cover everything. There's still a bunch of other things, but we covered the stuff that is really relevant to us.
I wanted to talk about the things that really sat with me individually, that have stayed on my mind as reflections, and things that I haven't seen elsewhere. So like if there's discourse about, whatever, like that's great. And people can have, opinions about that, but I just don't happen to be one of those people. These are the things I had opinions on.
Mm-hmm. These are the things in my Jeep. Okay. So on that note, I think we can wrap up, right, Joy? That's it. Anything else?
Yeah. It was
as Drew Bonner puts it, of all the things that happened at the Oscars, these were some of them.
Beautiful.
That's kind of a beautiful. Chef's kiss. Love it.
It was still like an incredible night. It was an incredible gift to me joy. Like it felt tailor-made for me, just like the movie felt tailor-made for me. And so I am happy to still be in dialogue with some of the ideas I heard and really grateful for the experience. And I am really moved that many other people seem to feel the same way.
Indeed. All right. Well, thanks to Joy O'Napping on Twitter for chatting with me today about the Oscars. I am David Chen. Thank you if you are a patron of mine at patreon.com/Dave Chen. I'll be releasing this as a podcast over at patreon.com/Dave Chen. But thanks for all of your support. And if you subscribe to me on Twitch or YouTube, thank you as well. Keep it tuned in here. I'm going to try to, I'm enjoying this live setup, and I'm going to try to go live more often in the future. So keep it subscribed, hit that bell icon, and you'll catch us more when we go live in the future. Have a good night.